What's up guys, my name's Tyler, and for the past 4 years I've taught English abroad. It's been an incredibly rewarding journey, and when I reflect back on who I was before I took the leap, I'm reminded of how much I've learned along the way. So with that in mind, here are 15 life lessons I've learned from teaching English abroad.
We are the music makers. And we are the dreamers of dreams.
Number 1. How to address an audience. When I think back to who I was during those first days in a Korean classroom, I was terrified to walk up and address the class. But as I did it more frequently, I became more comfortable, and I think that's an extremely important skill to have in life. When I think back to those days prior to teaching and those public speaking classes I had to take, I remember an extreme anxiety of getting up and presenting to a group of people. And while I haven't given any public speeches per se, these past 4 years of addressing large groups of students of all ages have made me far more comfortable with it, and at this point I really don't get any sort of anxiety at all. And I think that's maybe how I'm able to do this, although it's still a bit strange to talk to a lens. Number 2 is how to stimulate conversation. So those of you who know me from high school or my childhood years probably know me as a pretty shy person. I've changed a lot since then, and I think that's largely due to teaching English abroad. Your main objective is to stimulate conversation. And that's something that's extremely useful outside the classroom as well. These days, I find myself far more likely to spark up a conversation with a stranger than I ever did before, and I totally attribute that to being the facilitator of conversation in so many classroom settings. The third life lesson I've learned from teaching English abroad is how others live, and I've learned this through cultural immersion. So growing up in Central Texas, I often had this curiosity of what the rest of the world would be like. What would it be like to grow up in the Czech Republic or to work in a different continent? And teaching English abroad has been incredibly enlightening in that regard. Not only have I been able to visit popular sites as a tourist would do, but I've been able to work hand in hand with locals, and in the classroom as a teacher, I've been able to ask very pertinent questions, and I've learned a lot of cultural aspects that I don't think a tourist would get. For example, I know from polling my students in the Czech Republic that 75% of them prefer to live in a village as opposed to a city. And it's little bits of information like that that make it all worth it. Alright, so number 4, sort of snowballing off of that cultural immersion aspect, through teaching English abroad, I have learned how to speak Spanish.
Oye, si tú hablas español, yo hablo inglés perfectamente. Como presidente. ¿Quién es? ¿Donald Trump? Sí, me habló como así.
As I've stated in other videos, I'm not entirely fluent, but I have been able to progress significantly because I often have to use it in the classroom. I work with students of all ages, and with the younger ones or those of lower levels, it's very helpful to use the Spanish language to explain things. And it's through the use of this language and through listening to others around me, be it co-workers or students in the hallways, that I'm able to immerse in the language and really use it on a daily basis. The 5th thing I've learned from teaching English abroad is how to improvise. So you never know what's going to happen in the classroom, be it a technical error like perhaps the Wi-Fi is down or the projector doesn't work, or maybe your class is canceled or they've switched you to an entirely different class at the last minute. This depends country to country, but in every country I've taught in, I have had to improvise, and I think it's an extremely important skill to have. Not only do I have a plan B in most situations, but I typically have a plan C or even D as well. Being able to think on your feet is a skill that you can use in many aspects of life. The sixth thing I've learned is how to manage short amounts of time, or how to take advantage of short amounts of time. As an English teacher, it's common to have breaks in between classes. At one of my schools this year, I have a 30-minute break on Tuesdays. And prior to teaching English abroad as a student, I didn't really know what to do with that time. I was far more likely just to scroll through Instagram, and before I knew it, I'd look up and it'd be time to start my next class. But as an English teacher, I've learned to take advantage of that time, whether it's prepping for another lesson or focusing on a different type of project for myself, such as one of these videos or something written. And I think being able to take advantage of short amounts of time is an extremely valuable skill. So not only have I learned how to manage my time when it's extremely limited, but as an English teacher, I've learned how to deal with an abundance of time. One of the things that I've been surprised about with teaching English abroad is that I have a lot of free time. Even in Korea, when I was working 40 hours a week and I was lesson planning in the evenings, because I didn't know anyone there, and as I've talked about it could be rather isolating, knowing how to deal with an abundance of time is an extremely important skill. And we're not talking about watching Netflix or YouTube here. I'm talking about discovering your hobbies, discovering things that interest you. And that's what I've done with this time. So this year I'm working a lot on these video projects. Last year I focused mainly on writing. But in both situations, I've been able to identify things that really interest me, and I've been able to really take advantage of that time. The eighth thing I've learned from teaching English abroad is how to manage my money. So as I've stated in the past, most English teacher salaries are fairly modest. You're not going to get rich teaching English. And with that in mind, in many of my situations, getting by with my salary has been a bit of a challenge. However, I have learned to manage my money in a way that has limited any sort of frivolous expenses, and I'm now able to live comfortably on a limited budget, and I think that's an extremely important skill to learn. Number 9 is how to understand our future generation or generations. As I've stated, I work with people of all ages, but particularly working with the younger generations has been extremely interesting for me because it's an insight on what's to come, our future as a society, and being able to ask questions such as how they feel about political issues or how they feel about the future of the workforce has been incredibly enlightening. And much to my surprise, I think we're going to be alright. I have hope for our future generations. The 10th thing I've learned from teaching English abroad is how to live a minimalist lifestyle. Going back to money management, as an international English teacher, I've never had a lot of expendable income. But that's alright, that has totally fit into the lifestyle of prioritizing experiences as opposed to things. As an international English teacher, considering a purchase, I'm constantly asking myself, how does this serve me? And does it fit into my plan? And because each contract is only for one academic year at a time, you know that this situation is temporary and you don't need to invest in so many things. It's going to be a lot more difficult to move and to take advantage of the next opportunity if you've acquired too many things. So I feel a lot lighter, a lot more fresh living a more minimalist lifestyle. The 11th thing I've learned is how to accept responsibility. So going back to my first job, which was in a corporate office setting, the most demoralizing aspect of it was the fact that I could potentially work there for the rest of my life. As someone who had only ever known the schedule of a student with long breaks during the summer and long breaks for Christmas and other holidays like that, that absolutely terrified me. After I left that job, I did a series of seasonal jobs, which were about 4 months each, and that allowed me to warm up to the idea of a more long-term commitment. Teaching abroad for one academic year at a time has been a good middle spot for me, and I suggest it for anyone who's coming out of school. This is a familiar schedule, and it teaches you how to accept responsibility without having to overly commit. The 12th thing I've learned is how to be less selfish. In my early 20s, pretty much every decision I made was about me and me only. As I've mentioned before, I left my job in Korea early, and while I don't regret it, I do feel a bit guilty for abandoning my students. As I've worked with students more over the years, I've recognized how important it is to invest in their futures, and even something like calling in sick can significantly affect the lessons of both my students and my colleagues, my peers. So it's challenged me to be less selfish. Number 13 is how to be less consumeristic. As I've talked about with money management and a more minimalist approach to consuming and an overall life, teaching English abroad has made me far less consumeristic. Before I even began that job in the corporate setting, I spent over $1,000 on clothes. I remember I bought 2 suits for $500 each. I bought several pairs of dress shoes, corresponding belts and ties. I spent a ridiculous amount of money just to make what I thought would be a good first impression. Now I look back at that and I think it's incredibly foolish. Teaching English abroad has given me a new perspective on purchasing and consuming. When you're working with kids, they don't care what you're wearing, there's no one to judge, and you realize that it's not about the things you own, but the connections you form and the experiences you have. The 14th thing I've learned is how to interact with people of all ages. Over these past 4 years of teaching, I've taught people from ages 5 all the way up to 65. And it's through these interactions that I've gotten to know so much more about different generations and different types of people. It's been incredibly rewarding for me, far beyond any sort of monetary compensation. Alright, so the 15th and final thing I've learned in my years of teaching English abroad is how to be more authentic. When I think back to my first days in the classroom, I think back to a time that was incredibly taxing. I was trying to present, I was trying to put on a show. I didn't know any better at the time. But each day I was going home entirely exhausted and feeling like I'd been lying the whole time. I quickly learned that in order to sustain this type of work, the only thing you can do is be yourself. And I think that's something that's incredibly important to remember in all aspects of life. If you're not being yourself, I think you should really question why. So these are the 15 things that come to mind when I think back on what I've learned from teaching English abroad. Now I'm sure there are others, and perhaps I'll elaborate a bit more in the future. I definitely intend to continue making videos like this and others based on expat and international life. As always, feel free to reach out to me with any questions or if you're looking for any sort of advice. Oh, and one last thing, I'm on a mission to get to 1,000 subscribers, so if you like the content, feel free to subscribe.